Welcome back to Gaming with Spoons. Dreamcast Guy made a very interesting video that I felt like would be a really great topic for discussion, and this of course was, do you need to beat a video game in order to review it? He had talked about how lengthy of a game that Octopath Traveler was and how he had to sink a lot of hours into that game before he felt like he could come out with a review and give an honest opinion about that game. And he said in order for him to do that, he feels he has to beat the game to have an understanding of what's going on. Now, one thing he said some other YouTubers are talking about is you can play a game for 10 hours and throw your review up. You know the gist of what the game's going to play. You know how the game's going to be. I think it depends on the game. Say if we're taking a game in like Overwatch and reviewing that, I feel like spending 10 hours with that game is going to give you quite a good chunk of what that game is going to play like. You're going to get a handle on the gameplay mechanics, you're going to get a handle on how things feel, you're going to be able to understand a lot of the concepts at that point of what's going on and give people a fairly honest review as if this is a game that they're going to want to pick up or not. But if we take a game like Skyrim or Fallout 4 or The Witcher 3 Wild Hunt or Final Fantasy 15 even, and throw out a review 10 hours into that game, sure, you're going to have an idea what the combat's going to play like. You're going to have an idea of what the gameplay is going to feel like. You're going to have an overall general idea of how the game is going to play. But there's other elements at play with stories, especially games that have a narrative, because you have characters, you have side quests that open up and expand. Different side quests explain different things and have different stories that go on in a certain direction. Then you have the story in of itself, and then the ending to see how that all plays out. And I think when reviewing games like that, it's very important that you beat it, because sometimes an ending can make or break a game. Let's talk about my review for Yakuza 0. If you remember in my review for Yakuza 0, I did say that it had quite an emotional story. How would I have known that it had an emotional story if I hadn't beaten the game? I specifically remember saying in my review that towards the end the story gets very emotional. And I still stand by that. I still feel like the game got very emotional there towards the end. How would I have been able to explain that, even though I didn't go into the details, if I didn't know that personally? If someone were to ask me, well, how was the story? Oh, the story's good. I only got about 10 hours into the story before I was like, you know what? I'm done playing it. I mean, how would I be able to convey someone how good the story was if I hadn't actually beaten it? Case in point, a game that I feel a lot of people overlook the story to is Tales of Zestiria. One of my personal favorite Tales game. I have only played Xillia and Zestiria, mind you. But I feel like Zestiria's story was very interesting. It started off really slow, it maintained going pretty slow, but then there was a point where all the reveals come through. Everything about the story, everything that needed to be explained, all of a sudden is presented, and it was just wow. So the way the story took, the direction, everything that happened, it was something that just, it caught me off guard, and it changed my entire perspective of that game. Its story alone was enough to be able to make me fall in love with that game, the way that that game played out at the ending. And it was an experience that I didn't see coming. On the other hand, Tales of Xillia, story starts out amazing. It blew my mind up until a certain point. Then I got up into the ending to kind of see what was going on, and the whole game kind of fell apart at the ending. I wasn't blown away by the ending. I didn't like the direction that the last 1/4 of the game really took. I thought it was just an overall unsatisfying experience. Not to say the rest of the game wasn't really, really good, but give you an example, I was willing to give Tales of Xillia a 9 out of 10 because of that. After seeing its ending, I have to say I'd give it an 8 out of 10. Just, it let me down that much. It's another thing I do want to bring up, and I'm not going to call out the reviewer, but I will call out the game. And this is Star Ocean: The Last Hope. I personally enjoyed this game. I thought it was very fun. I get there are those people out there who didn't enjoy it, and that's fine. But one particular review that I was looking for, I remember getting, before the game had come out, I remember getting my magazine and looking at this magazine, reading the review. First thing I went to was to see how Star Ocean The Last Hope played out, because I had beaten all 3 of the other Star Ocean games up to that point to prepare myself to be able to play The Last Hope. And in the review, the guy specifically keeps saying, after he starts every paragraph, in the first 3 hours. Next paragraph, in the first 3 hours. Next paragraph, in the first 3 hours. This really led me to question whether or not this guy had actually gotten past the first 3 hours. Because it seems every complaint that he had was in the first 3 hours. And I take a look at Star Ocean: The Last Hope as a whole, and I really feel like that game, speaking from personal opinion, was a game that story didn't open up until about 10 hours in. There wasn't really anything going on in the story up until that point. Now, Star Ocean is known for being a story-based game that does that. It takes a lot of build-up. It takes a lot of time to go through and, completely build that up to the point where you're like, okay, this makes sense. It's like when I reviewed Star Ocean: Integrity and Faithlessness. I waited and waited and waited till the end for that to build up to the story and become good, and it just never did. It was an ultimate disappointment when it came to Integrity and Faithlessness' story. And because of that guy's review, every time I see him post a review for that magazine, and yes, he still does reviews for this company, I cringe. I cannot take his opinion seriously. This is also why I recommend finding people that you trust, people who are into the same types of games that you are, because you're going to at least get an honest opinion, hopefully, as to what their thoughts are. And I said I can't take that guy's review seriously anymore. Maybe he did get past the first 3 hours, I don't know, but his review definitely was not reflective of that. And I feel his review could have been more honest had he not focused so much on the first 3 hours of the game. So, yes, I think very much that in order to be able to fully review a game, you have to be able to beat it. One last closing note that I want to bring up, something that DreamcastGuy did bring up, was Nier Automata, and how that game has 3 different endings. While you could argue that beating the game as 2B completes the game, it's technically not true, as that's the ending to her. You see the credits roll, but then you go play as 9S. You get a different perspective as to what's going on with 9S and kind of how that plays out from there. Then, of course, you pick up the Control as A2 and see how her story plays out. And what this does is it completes one major arc in the narrative. It's these 3 different arcs that come together to tell one final conclusion. And I'm not spoiling a story by any means at this point. Nier Automata is a story you need to experience for yourself. But I think in that respect, you have to get all 3 endings. There are, if you want to be honest and convey what a game's like, then perhaps getting that true ending is something that you want to experience, you want to see, so you can be honest in its execution. It's as I said with Tales of Zestiria, how that changed my whole perspective of the game by its ending and how it came together completely. So very much beating a game matters, especially if it's something that has a great story, especially if it's a game that people are going to be told a great story. They expect a great story. So if you play Final Fantasy XVI when it comes out, I feel like you have to have its story in its entirety. Now, Final Fantasy XVI coming out, if they cut that up into content and DLC that sucker like they have Final Fantasy 15, that brings up a whole brand new conversation at that point. Should you review that game at day one? But we'll save that discussion for another time. You guys have been watching Gaming with Spoons. Be sure to hit subscribe there for me to keep up to date with all of my content. You can follow me on Facebook and Twitter. Links are going to be down below in that description box. And most importantly, stay happy, be happy, game happy. Spoons is checking out.